So the big question is this: how do passionate golfers like you and I develop a stock shot day in and day out? A stock shot that's as reliable as the sun coming up in the morning. That's the question, and this podcast is the answer. Welcome to Stock Shot Secrets. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Stock Shot Secrets. I am here with the famous Mike Burry, who I am a big fan of. Love his content on YouTube, on Instagram, and mostly love it because it's just different, right? Like you've got a very great niche of like what you're putting out there, Mike. So thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, mate. Pleasure. I'm very excited to be here.
So, Mr. World Traveler, where are you today? Because it seems like when we look through, whether it's through your emails or social, it's like, today I'll be in Dallas. Today I'm in California. Next day, Chicago. Like, where are you today?
Yeah, we're in New York City right now. We're at 5 Iron Grand Central. So Grand Central Terminal is literally like, it's right over there.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, New York City is awesome. We lived out there for, my wife lived in Brooklyn Heights for a while, and New York's amazing. So, but that's not where, obviously from your accent, that is not originally where you're from, unless you're just pretending.
Yeah, just a little bit away from here. Yeah, from Australia originally. So yeah, it's the Australian accent has gotten washed out a little bit, just so that everyone over here understands me, so I don't have to repeat my Starbucks order like five times now.
Right. So tell us about that. So when did you? What kind of the journey from you going to Australia to being, a top instructor here in the United States? How did that journey really percolate and bringing you over here to the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the shortest version of kind of a long story is, I grew up obviously playing golf in Australia, junior golfer. Was very lucky to be around the best teachers, in Australia, who are some of the best in the world, best players in the world. Kind of growing up as a kid, and was going along the journey of developing my own golf game and playing professionally. I've struggled with injury issues my entire life and my entire career. And so my playing days were always going to come to an end. When I was working on my own game, when I wasn't, I was always watching what the other coaches were doing, and they were such great mentors that I really kind of wanted to be more like them than anything else.
Who were some of those mentors?
Some of the main ones were Dale Lynch and Steve Bann.
Okay.
So those guys taught golfers like Jeff Ogilvy, Robert Allenby, Stuart Appleby, Aaron Baddeley, got those guys from kids to the PGA Tour, and even obviously Jeff Ogilvy, major winner. And so, there were such just cool guys to be around that, I shadowed thousands of lessons, even just, before I decided I wanted to step into a teaching career. Yeah. And, it was just kind of a natural path for me. My playing days were going to run out from injuries. And at the end of 2007, I decided I wanted to come over here to the United States and see what the top teachers were doing here versus what we were doing in Australia.
Yeah. And then where did you land when you came over from Australia? Did you land there in New York?
No. So I started with like a 6-week trip, just seeing what the top teachers were doing. And the first stop was Jim McLean Golf School at Doral in Florida.
Yeah.
Spent a few weeks there, traveled around to a bunch of other places. And long story short, I came back and worked for Jim McLean.
Yeah. And what's amazing is I think that's great advice for a lot of the instructors that are listening to here. Or listening to this, is that when you decided you wanted to teach, the first thing that you did was essentially take money out of your wallet, which, if you were anything like me, maybe just there wasn't a lot there at that age. And it's like, I'm going to kind of go around and I'm going to learn from the best in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, that 6-week trip cost me about $35,000. And, it was a priceless education, and it teed up an opportunity for me to come and work for Jim McLean. So it was
absolutely that was your college, right? And I'm like, that's the truth of when you're always talking to like young. I talked to a guy the other day. We were at a neighborhood party, Mike, and it was a 22-year-old, and he was like, "Hey, you're doing really well, Kyle. Like, what advice would you give?" I go, "Whatever industry you want to get into, find someone in that industry who is really smart and really successful and literally, for all intents and purposes, like be their bitch, quite frankly, for like a year or two and just do it for, and see if you'll like legitimately just do it for free. Right? Like that's what Warren Buffett did with, I forget the guy's name, but he worked for him for like 2 years. And the guy was like, and he basically said to him, you can work for me, Warren, but like that's going to be too expensive. And he's like, what do you mean? It's working for free. He goes, yeah, but for me to train you costs more money than me paying you. So there's something to be said about the beauty of what you did in going around and learning from these coaches, which has made you such an amazing golf coach. I was similar in the fact of like, I didn't do it as a traveling trip, but it was just my team of coaches as players, like learning, as Mike Bender as my swing coach and Stan Utley for putting and Siegman for short game and P and Lynn from Vision 54. So God kind of had me on a mentorship over that time. But I think that that's for the young professional that's trying to say like, hey, I want to be the Mike Burry. Like that's a great avenue to kind of just go, hey, can I come shadow and learn from you? So now you've traveled the country, you've done that. So then where do you plan? And then you work for Jim, and Jim was in Texas.
So Jim had a school in Texas, the Texas Golf Center. I worked for Jim at that location for maybe 4 years. When you work for McLean, you get an amazing education.
Yeah.
And he really trains instructors well. So I was very fortunate from that standpoint to be around. And just kind of going back to your point from earlier, I mean, these top instructors are very generous with giving their time, giving their knowledge. You just have to ask for it, but they are very generous.
Now, it's changed quite a bit, obviously, in regards to there's some things that haven't changed in teaching since you started. And you started teaching in 2008, you said? Was that kind of when you started to go on your mentorship?
Yeah, United States, 2008, yes.
Yeah, so we're about the same age. I turned 39 on. How old are you, Mike?
42, approaching 43 very quickly.
Yeah, I'm 39 next Tuesday. So
you're a baby. You're a baby.
So teaching though has changed since like we were playing professionally and grinding as college kids and high school kids. Like there's all this technology, right? Like you're in 5-iron golf, similar format to kind of like what the golf room is. How have you seen? How do you're teaching a lot of your lessons through, which is kind of interesting because I want to parlay that into what you put out on social media. But, how have you're doing a lot of these lessons with TrackMan in indoor facilities in a sense. How has the teaching changed from where you were kind of learning it from Jim McLean and some of these mentors? And then at the same token, how has it not changed, right? Like, obviously physics are physics, so the lines and everything and the way the video should look is the way the video should look. But how has your teaching kind of changed and morphed over that almost 20-year span?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with maybe like what hasn't changed yet is what hasn't changed is you still got to put the work in. Regardless of how much technology we have, it's still up to the student to go out and get the job done, put the work in. Certainly when I was growing up, I mean, I remember the only video lessons I did as a junior were when my coach, lifted up the camera, sat it on his shoulder. Yeah. And then we would go up to the pro shop, eject the VHS tape, pop it in, and watch it. And best case, most, techie thing was a little bit of, dry erase on the TV screen.
At 10 frames per second.
Yeah. And it was like, well, I don't even know what happened there. Couldn't see anything.
Right.
So, excuse me, as obviously with things evolving and with launch monitors like TrackMan, I mean, when I first got a TrackMan, which was maybe, might have been 2012, 13, something like that. The first thing when I started using it, I was like, whoa, thank goodness I was telling people the right information.
Right.
Because we couldn't quantify it before. We couldn't measure it. Obviously there's a lot of things you can't see on a 2D video. And so that was like a relief. It's like, okay, good. I've been telling people the right thing. Like in my practice these days, and when I was before, being involved at say 5-iron, before opening up my indoor facility in Dallas, where I was based at, we had an 18-hole golf course. We had driving range. We had a par 3 course. We had a short game area. My indoor facility was like, it was pretty modest to say the least. It was a green net with a big hole ripped in it because balls were just flying into it. Right?
Stock shots hitting the same spot.
Exactly. I had my TV screens, so I could see video and I could see TrackMan numbers, and I had my TrackMan, sitting on the floor. And the only practice that I did, when I was working on my swing was hitting into this green net because I wanted to see the video and I wanted to see the TrackMan data right away. I hit balls on the range, like I just wanted to hit off of grass and maybe see some light. But in terms of working on my game, still true to these days, I only do it on TrackMan. I only do it when I have data. Obviously, short game, different story. Getting on the golf course, different story. I strongly encourage my students, and like I said, even in my own practice, I'll practice on TrackMan with the data and video, and I'll play on the golf course. And that's
I think that what's interesting is I was talking to our elite junior kids the other day, Mike, and I was kind of talking to him about momentum and like building habits into your practice. There's a lot to be said about momentum and the fact of like, what do you create as your standard of beauty of how you practice? And because I was challenging him, I was like, how many times have you guys videotaped your swing this week? How many times have you guys used like a training aid? How many times have you guys used feedback? How many times have you competed? How many times did you random? And I was saying something that you're kind of uttering right now, which is when you start to build in these habits into your practice. So let's just say videoing, right? Because you and I we'll call it like videoholics, right? Like we want to see our swing on video or the TrackMan data or whatever it is. When you have that stuff and then you start to practice with that stuff, when you don't have that stuff, it's like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, is the face in the right spot? Like, am my club in the right spot? Whereas it doesn't mean you need to be like dependent upon it, but you need to have a frame of like, if you're doing those things and you're building them into your practice habits, that is what then becomes normal. And when you're not doing it, it's like you're out of sorts. It's almost like the simplest analogy would almost be like alignment sticks on the range. Like I always make the joke that if I'm hitting balls and I don't have alignment sticks down, I'm as uncomfortable if I was like hitting balls on the range with my pants off. Like I'm just like, what am I doing out here? Like I need to make sure that like I've got my station set up, and like if I don't have sticks down, where unfortunately I was at the course yesterday, there was 20 people on the range, and you know how many people had alignment sticks? One. There was one person, and the one person was a mini tour player.
I was going to say, it was either that or it was your student.
Yeah, so the point is like even a simple thing of like that, of just throw some alignment sticks down, man. And they're like, well, I can't film my swing. And I'm like, you need a camera. It should be 28 to 32 inches above the ground. It just so happens that the stand bag, the base is 30 inches off the ground. It's like the perfect tripod. So that's very, very interesting. So with kind of talking that and now kind of also switching gears, it's almost like a 180 in a sense. So you're this amazing teacher, you've mentored, you got the video, the TrackMan is validating what you've said as a teacher. But now when you go look at your Instagram content, right? The Instagram content, which is amazing. And if you are not following Mike on Instagram, you definitely do, because the content that you're putting out there it's different than mine in a good way. Because you are talking more about these are things to like build skill, and building skill relative to building technique. And you could kind of say, hey, building skill does build technique, and that's good discussion in itself. But what is your passion level, and how did that all spark of like, hey, I'm going to show these little worm cams down here by the ball of like miss the water bottle, like all those type of things. How did that really percolate in your brain?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this could be a 4-hour podcast if we wanted it to be, but it's if I go back to myself as a player, kind of like I wear two hats, right? You and I are both players and we're both coaches, and so as a player, when I was working with my coach, I had a tendency to get too deep in the weeds on technique. At the same time, I always wanted to know, like, if we're making a change, tell me why. Tell me why we're making the change, what the goal is, so that I can understand what we're trying to do and I can buy into it. And then, my coach did a really good job of finding a way to give me either a swing thought or a cue or a drill that was very dynamic, and it was less sort of technical focused. And so, with my students, we have, kind of deep in the weeds technical conversations about some of the TrackMan numbers. And, there's a little kind of coffee table in my training room. And if we're talking about something like path or could be face closing, on the way down, whatever the case may be, I'll describe, hey, imagine the coffee table is sitting there. And so then while we're doing these kind of either dry swings or pauses or whatever, I'll tell them coffee table.
Yeah.
And we've talked about what the instructions are. So, we give them like these very simple, dynamic thoughts that they can think of in 200ths of a second.
Yeah.
And, we're not in the middle of the swing thinking, oh, swing direction this, attack angle that.
Right.
And so, with regards to like the video content, I try and provide either some feedback hacks, some tips that, one, hopefully won't ruin half the people that watch it because it's not related to them, right? It's tricky.
Right.
And when the way that these kind of low angle, non-talking videos started was, this is maybe 2017, something like that. I put the camera on the ground and I chipped over it. So the camera's sitting here, club goes like right, this is a slow-mo video. Club goes right over the phone, right over the camera. The ball flies right over it. Like a 5-second, 7-second video. I posted up and this is 1 minute before a lesson. I walk straight into a lesson and then my phone just starts blowing up. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I see like this, all these Instagram notifications. Long story short, that video, kind of went crazy. A couple of days later, I did this kind of edit. I sprayed the face, hit a shot, showed the impact. And same thing. This video like goes crazy. It gets reposted everywhere. And before that, I was doing these videos. I had this whole segment, series on my Instagram that was minute to fix it. It was like, well, Instagram gives us 60 seconds. I'm going to use these 60 seconds. And
yeah,
I thought these videos were really good. They got no traction whatsoever. I post up these, 7-second videos and bam, and
bam, million views.
Kind of,
right.
It just took off from there.
Hey guys, I hope you are enjoying this episode of the Stock Shot Secrets podcast. If you are enjoying it, be sure to like this episode. Be sure to subscribe so you can always see when they're coming out. And most importantly, if you would be so kind to be able to share this podcast with other passionate golfers who are trying to get better and build stock shots, because it grows through you sharing it. Thank you so much for tuning in. And now back to Stock Shot Secrets. Yeah, that's awesome. And what's cool about the stuff is that it's kind of the things that you're doing. It's kind of almost backdooring improvement, right? So it's like hitting the center of the face, and maybe even also some things of like, you could do a traditional video of like how to create gauge speed on a putt, but you might do something different, which is amazing. Like you'll teach like recently on your Instagram feed, you've got the three, I call it the Towers of Babylon. That's what I call the drill. But you got like the three T's, like the Brad Faxon 3T drill, where it's like, okay, hit one soft, hit one medium, hit one hard. So you're learning like how to essentially visualize what a good shot looks like here, and then allow those same shots to essentially create the ball flights that you're wanting, right? So in regards to like, I guess your teaching philosophy, right? And teaching philosophy amongst teachers, in some sense, I think you have like, I don't know, I would say you almost have like two camps in a sense, but then you've got like, everybody's got their own thing, right? And there's a world in Mike Burry's world of like matchups, for example, of like what you think. If you were going to say to your user, right, and they're coming into 5-iron or 8-under golf or in Chicago or whatever you go, my students usually will like, these are usually the first or second thing like I'm usually tackling. So for us, for example, right, just my subjective opinion is, I personally, some teachers literally think the opposite, which is fine. Like, I think that alignment is really important. Like, I think it's like maybe numero uno, because I think the brain like really manufactures whatever it needs to do to make the ball go straight, right? So that's usually something we would really, really hammer at the start is alignment, and then from there building the swing upon that. But like, what are the one or two things in regards to the Mike Burry system, if you will, of like, hey, these are principles in which I stand by, which I think these are really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, from a full swing perspective,
Yeah.
I don't have a cookie cutter approach to teaching. It's not lesson one's a grip lesson, then a stance lesson, then a takeaway lesson.
Yep.
Once a student comes in, we collect the TrackMan data. We obviously have the video. I'm looking at how well a golfer can control what I call the non-negotiables, which is, club path, face angle, low point, and contact. And we'll go back as far as we need to, depending on what we, kind of uncover as to, it's not the school of draw. We're not getting every single player into hitting a draw. We have faders, we have drawers.
Yep.
It's like you said, kind of looking at potential matchups and seeing what direction we need to go in. And then with regards to path and face, what do we need to do to create the most amount of consistency that we can, knowing that that's obviously it's challenging. And we'll go back as far as we need to make the adjustments based on some preferences that I have.
Yep.
And, that's kind of like, that's the initial process.
Yeah.
And whether that be any of those kind of non-negotiables, kind of path, face, low point, contact, the end goal is not to make the prettiest looking swing. It's how well can you control those factors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Outside of swing, then, we focus largely on skill development, skill training, skill practice. So like in putting, for example, outside of the technical elements, we're looking at, your putting speed control, putting accuracy control, and chipping its distance control, proximity to the hole.
So would you say that you do with your players, do you do a whole bunch of, I'll use the word games and competing to essentially, do you use games and competing to create more of the technical stuff, or do you create the technical and then throw in the games? Because, some coaches will be like, we're going to learn, like, we'll just say, a football coach or a basketball coach. It's like, we're going to coach and we're going to teach your skill, but we're going to do it, excuse me, we're going to do it through scrimmages and like through simulation. And then you have other ones. It's like, no, like we're going to like learn how to goose it like this until our arms fall off, which is fine. It's another way to do it. And then we'll work on some scrimmages and see if we can apply that thing. I mean, how would you, with your players, do you feel like you do more of the technical to the skill? That's probably where we probably do. I would say if we're more heavy, it's probably 65% technical to then 35% to the creating the games. And then you have other coaches which are like, no, we're like 90% games, 10% technical, and we're working on the technical through the games, right? It's, apples, it's either both are fine. I was kind of curious on what you would do.
I would say that it's a bit of a sliding scale depending on, kind of where the golfer's at, their skill level. So for an example, a golfer that is, say newer, there may be more technical work at first just to kind of get our ducks in a row. Then we'll incorporate the skill training and, they'll most likely hit a point where, okay, I can't do this drill. I can't get my ball with putting to roll through the gate. And so then we'll go back to the technique. We'll look at, okay, we're 3 degrees out to wind with the face pointing 5 degrees to the right. We got to address that. And then jump back to the skill training. So it's kind of a back and forth and a sliding scale. Ultimately with, kind of the elite players, more advanced players, the goal is to move, from like a periodization standpoint, as we approach, an event that we've highlighted as, important, then we'll be moving technical work into more maintenance mode and ramping up skill training as we approach, kind of tournament week.
Right. That's awesome. Now to switch to our final kind of questions, I want to talk a little bit about some business stuff and life stuff, if that's okay.
Cool.
Because I think that you had illustrated at the beginning with the first thing that you had said on this Stock Shot Secrets podcast of you got to put the work in, right? So the one thing that was amazing, because really I've known about you and I've watched your content for a while. I met you the first time this year in January at the show. And what was amazing and it just kind of made my brain think, was I was like, okay, like here's this guy, and I'm the same way. So it was soothing to hear, but I was like, so who's creating like these lead generators on Instagram, and like who's doing your PDFs, and like 7 skills to learn putting skill, and like all this thing, and you're like, you're looking at it. Right. And I was like, man. Right. So like, I think that we live similar lives, and I've got 3 kids. You have 1 right now, right?
Right.
A little daughter. Is that correct?
I got a son, Nicholas. Yeah.
Oh, son. Right. Sorry.
Yeah.
So Nicholas. So, you've got 8 under golf that you're running in Dallas. You're working in New York. You're going to Chicago. You're going to Dallas. You're going to all these things. You're being a husband. You're teaching lessons. You got like 200,000 Instagram people. You're filming videos, all this stuff. Like, I want to say almost like what's a day in the life of Mike look like? Like, when's it start? When's it end? Like today, I'm starting at 7. We started shooting these podcasts at 7, and I have a webinar tonight at 9 o'clock, so I'm going to be home at 11. Like, welcome to the day. Now, this day
Absolutely.
that's a little longer than normal. But how are you balancing all of that stuff? Just if you're giving life advice to maybe a younger professional who wants to grow in their craft, or it could just be, it's more of a life principle, really. Like, how do you go about tackling life?
Boy, that's like, I'm still trying to figure it out, to be honest with you.
Right.
Like kind of a standard day for me, like when we're in Dallas, I wake up at 4 a.m. Here on the East Coast, I wake up at 5 a.m. And for me, it's like, trying to get a win in early. My day is like a day of shifting gears. I'll be busting out lessons, depending on the day. It could be a full day of lessons. It could be a half day of lessons. And then I'm, creating content. And then I am, looking at a profit and loss statement for 8 under. And then I am, trying to spend some time with my son and, blowing bubbles. And, then it's back to the computer again.
Yeah.
I would say that, as just an entrepreneur in general, there's a point in time where you do have to do everything yourself, because you're just getting going. And I think that my advice to somebody else would be start to find the right people to move some of the tasks off that you don't need to do.
Yep.
I've kept myself in too many tasks.
Delegation's a good art to have and a hard trait to get, especially as the entrepreneur, right? To say like, okay, like I'm going to pass this off. So
yeah. And there is like this, I said earlier that you have to do the work, and sometimes there's, some confusion between like just doing busy work, being busy, and doing like effective work. And you could apply the same kind of concept to golf. You can go to the range and you can hit ball after ball after ball for hours and hours and hours. It's not necessarily quality work. It's work. You'll be exhausted. You can tell everybody that you're grinding away versus doing it, in a more effective, efficient manner.
Yeah, and I think it's the same parallel. I think that's why I love golf, in the sense that there's many reasons, but I think that golf works on you more than you work on it, especially if you can look at the parallels between life and golf, in the fact that, to reiterate your point, there's practicing and then there's practicing. So it's kind of like there's reading a book and then there's reading a book. There's reading a book where like, and we've all done this, where we've read a page and we're like, what did I just read? And then you got to go back and reread it. So that's like the guy who's practicing, and he's out there for an hour and a half, and he's like, what am I doing? What did I work on today? I don't even know. I just slapped golf balls. And the same just goes for life, of like, how are you, like I always say, like on a practice standpoint, and I think we actually posted this yesterday on our Instagram, we formulate practice into programming, blocking, random, and competing, right? So that's the framework that you follow. So it's always the convicting question of like, are you programming right now? Are you block practicing? Are you randomizing, or are you competing? And if the guy or the girl or the kid or whatever is like dropping 3 balls in the green and he's hitting putts, I'm like, are you programming, blocking, random, or competing? And they're like, I'm randomizing. I'm like, no, you're not. You're hitting 3 balls and it's all the same hole. And they're like, I'm competing. And I'm like, no, you're not. What are you playing for? They're like, I don't know. And they're like, I'm block
Yeah.
practicing. I'm like, no, you're not, because you have no way of telling whether or not you were doing it perfect, right? So like, you're actually not doing anything. So it's the same idea, I think, that from a business standpoint, an entrepreneur standpoint, is that what is the highest ROI for your time? And I mean, I think that our lives, Mike, are very, very similar, which is why I've wanted to bring you on and like kind of drawn, because I think we're in similar stages of life. Of like, I literally probably like you. I mean, I plan my life in like 7-minute increments, and there's never a moment that I'm not wasting. It's like, oh, I am at a stoplight or I'm pumping gas. Great. I can hammer off probably 2 things in this 90 seconds, right? Or it's
100%.
so you're like, oh, good. Like, I'm pumping gas. Great. Let me create a Canva ad for my PDF. And it's like, okay, now I'm like here. So like, let me throw something on my stories. And then, okay, I got to respond to this email. And I think that aside from just the golf entrepreneur, whether you were teaching golf or not teaching golf, you would be successful. And it just happens to be that God has called you to the game of golf, and you're really good at it, and you're really good at teaching at it. But I think that it's an art that people, the listeners, especially the business people that are listening, the entrepreneurs that are listening, whether they're in golf or not, is like maximizing every moment and then being mindful in the moment. And that's, for me personally, that's probably the hardest thing that I'm always working on and convicting myself on, is like, if I'm with my kids, just be with my kids. But like, if I'm teaching a lesson, just be teaching a lesson. If I'm looking at P&Ls, just look at P&Ls, right? So it's just being where your 2 feet are. And I think that that's hard when there's so many things that are demanded of us and you. But at the same time, it's like, it's a detriment, but it's also the thing that's probably made you very successful in the fact that you go, what you accomplish in a day, most would accomplish in a week, right? Which is that's like a born trait, really. I don't even know if, I mean, I guess you could self-motivate yourself into it, but it's almost a necessary evil, because like you with 8 under, like, your balls are probably in a noose with the Bills. It's like, I have no choice. This has to work. If it doesn't work, like, I'm going to ask to move in with Kyle in Columbus.
Right. For sure. And I think that golf teaches, to your point from earlier, golf teaches you so many of these skills, because it's such a difficult game. It's such an incredible challenge. And there's no shortcut to getting better at golf. The only potential shortcut is just doing things more effectively, but there's no like magic pill. There's no book to read that's going to give you all the answers and you can do it. You've got to put the work in. And when you're involved in golf at such an early age, the life skills that you acquire from it are just, I don't know, perhaps there are other, sports and what have you that develop the same thing, but we're very lucky to have the opportunity that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're lucky, Mike, to have you on this podcast, and thank you so much for joining us. We loved your insight. If people want to learn more about you or dive into any programs or whatever, where can they best find some Mike Burry stuff?
MikeBurry.com is always a good place. MikeBurry.com has, there's a bunch of cool freebies on there, and on social media or YouTube, it's Mike Burry Golf.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for being here, and have a nice day in New York. Hopefully it's not too hot there. It's very hot in Columbus right now, and New York can get hot and sticky and kind of smelly when it's too hot. So
it can. It's 70 degrees, in here all day long. So it's happy days, mate.
Cool. All right, buddy. Well, thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Carl. Cheers, mate.
All right,
appreciate
see you,
it,
buddy. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to the latest episode of Stock Shot Secrets. Now, as a listener of Stock Shot Secrets, I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to get better. So if you were to go to stockshotclub.com, I'm going to give you 7 days free access where you can send us your video and we will give you personalized individual attention as to what you need to do so that you can start building stock shots. So just go to stockshotclub.com and register there. We'll give you 7 days free where you can try it. And then if we like it, you can stay inside the Stock Shot Club where we can become your coach and walk with you for your entire journey. Thank you so much. And be sure to go visit stockshotclub.com.